Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Sarah Peternell. I'm the owner of Family Nutrition Services in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the creator of the 30-day online program called Nourished and Renewed with Hashimoto's. Welcome to today's video, which is actually the presentation of a case study, and it's based on a lot of years of working with people who have an underlying viral trigger for their autoimmune thyroiditis. So I'm not really talking about just one person, but what I want you to know is that there are many triggers for a reason why a person may develop Hashimoto's. And of course, it isn't always easy to identify the underlying or root cause, but sometimes when a person has a history or a known experience with a health-changing or life-altering virus, then we can sometimes draw some conclusions. And we have a lot of research to back it up that in fact, many people who have Hashimoto's may at one point in their life have had a serious viral infection. Now, one of the ones I'm going to be talking about specifically today is Epstein Barr Virus. We'll call it EBV for short. But there are other viruses that you should know about as well, and I'll tell you about some of those right now. We have some research I'm pulling up here on my computer that there may be some relationship, obviously to Epstein-Barr, which I just said, but also to rubella or mumps or parvovirus or enterovirus. These are all illnesses that, especially for people who maybe in childhood experienced one of these infections, may later in life experience the autoimmune thyroiditis known as Hashimoto's. Now, when I'm working with people of an older age, sometimes it's difficult to tell, right? So a lot of people that I work with who are maybe baby boomers or who have been around for quite a good number of years or decades, they have experiences, obviously, in contracting a number of different types of pathogens. That's just the deal. When you live longer, you have more experience and more exposure to these types of viral and also bacterial and even parasitic infections. So sometimes it can be kind of hard to tell. But one of the things that I use in working with my clients is a timeline. And if you sign up for the Nourished and Renewed with Hashimoto's 30-day online program, you'll actually get a whole module where I'll walk you through how to do a health timeline to see if you can identify a possible trigger. Sometimes when we know these triggers, we can work our way backwards and kind of go back to thinking about what our health was like prior to that particular thing that may actually have been the straw that broke the camel's back. When I'm working with people in my practice and we use a health timeline, the goal is really to see if we can identify what we call never well sense. Now, never well sense is not something that I made up. It's actually a really strong component of a functional medicine timeline. It's also a critical component of homeopathic medicine. So if you are no stranger to working with other allied professionals in holistic health, maybe you've heard this phrase before, never well sense. It can be a lot of different things. Sometimes it can be an emotional trigger, trauma, physical experiences that we have, like I said, illnesses and injuries and a variety of other potential triggers. So the timeline helps us to kind of look back at a person's health history and see if by any chance there was an exposure to a virus or to an infection that may have disrupted their health later on, leading to this autoimmune illness. So we know from research that there's a possible link between Epstein Barr Virus, which we'll call EBV, and autoimmune thyroid disorders. So EBV is actually in the family known as human herpes virus 4. All right, so you don't really need to know that, but the herpes virus is really widespread throughout all of humans, really. I mean, it's not like this is something that is unusual or something that, we don't see very often in medical literature or in clinical practice. We see herpes families of virus all the time. So EBV is basically what is the viral infection that underlies mononucleosis or mono. So think back to potentially when you were in high school or even in college and you got what's called the kissing disease. The kissing disease is basically, because it's transmittable through person-to-person contact. And a lot of times young people in their teens and 20s become susceptible to mono and EBV because of really their lifestyle practices. They're living in a college dorm or they're, teenagers, they're high schoolers, very social. And of course, potentially depending on what they're doing, if they're in school or they're working, they may also be really run down with stress and really susceptible because of their lifestyle, like maybe not eating properly, or maybe they're staying up too late, or maybe they're consuming too much alcohol, partying with their friends, etc. So it is really common that we see mono and EBV affect a lot of people in their teens and 20s. And for most people, mono, it's a sore throat. Sometimes it's a rash, a fever, and it's basically characterized by many days, sometimes weeks of fatigue. A lot of people just recover from EBV mono and, move on with their lives, never to think about it again. But for some people, EBV goes dormant in the body. And this virus, although not particularly active and not causing any more harm, is still dysregulating and disrupting the immune system. And there are cases also of people having what's called a reactivated EBV, meaning that even though they may have had the infection in their teens or 20s, along comes maybe giving birth to a baby or a very stressful situation, the loss of a parent, a traumatic experience, pandemics, all kinds of, stuff where we're under this chronic stress. And all of a sudden, a person sees a reactivation of those exact same symptoms that they felt from long ago, basically characterized with tons of fatigue, kind of just feeling really run down, maybe a fever, sore throat. It may not look exactly like it did the very first time. Reactivated EBV is, in fact, something that may look quite different and be kind of hard to put your finger on it. So, EBV basically does sort of rear its ugly head during periods of high stress, poor lifestyle habits, trauma, again, and major lifestyle changes, which would also include big hormonal changes such as with pregnancy, perimenopause, or even menopause. So basically, I guess what the purpose of having this discussion and around the relationship, in particular with Hashimoto's, is that knowing if you have had EBV or mono may give you some insight as to what point in your life your immune system started to go wonky. And it may also help you sort of look back at the point where you were never well since and start to recover some of your health. So for me, I did have mono. I had mono when I was in college. I came home for a winter break. I had kind of the classic symptoms, and being someone who had had a lot of strep throat as a kid, I think I just chalked it up to strep throat. By the time I finally got to the doctor and was diagnosed with having mono, I was a couple weeks in to an illness that really, left me pretty debilitated with fatigue. And, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily never well since that time in college, but I do know that a lot of my health issues developed shortly after that. It wasn't too long after in college that I started to experience a real exacerbation of my IBS or irritable bowel symptoms. It also wasn't too long after that I started to have, again, with a really stressful job, periods of tons of different types of health situations popping up that I couldn't quite put my finger on. If you want to read about this more on my website, you can at sarahpeternell.com. Or if you want to watch one of my older videos about my first symptoms at the time of my diagnosis, you can watch that as well. But basically, they were kind of just coming on one by one, where I started to be essentially a chronically ill person in my early 20s. And what this ultimately manifested as was getting the diagnosis of Hashimoto's, where my antibody levels were in the thousands. Of course, I also had Hashimoto's as well as celiac disease, and at the time I didn't know that. So can I say for sure that for me, having EBV or mono was something that, maybe was a trigger for my autoimmune illness? I think it's probably one of many potential triggers. I think the fact that I had celiac disease and consumed gluten for most of my life until I became an adult probably played a role. I also think my genetics play a role as well. You may know that I'm adopted, and we don't have a lot of information about my biological family history. So I have a feeling there's some people out there like me that have similar kind of manifestation of their health issues. I also think that knowing my personality and my kind of type A and sort of older stress magnet relationship to working hard and playing hard, I think that probably played a role as well. Now, I have my theories about my own origin of Hashimoto's and the different symptoms and stages that I've dealt with over time. But what I see really running as a common thread among most of the clients that I work with who can point to that time where they were never well since, a time when they had a viral infection, or a time when they remember being sick as a kid or a teenager or as a young adult, is that usually there was some type of illness that maybe they weren't getting, effective treatment by a doctor, or they weren't getting effective diagnosis for many, many months, sometimes even years. A lot of times when a person has EBV or mono, the feeling of fatigue can turn into basically chronic fatigue syndrome. It can even look something like fibromyalgia later on down the road. And so sometimes the diagnosis before a person arrives at Hashimoto's is one of these other parts of the complex set of symptoms or the syndrome. Other things too that I've found with a lot of my clients is that they know that they've had a history of things like swollen lymph nodes, these little glands underneath the neck and the throat, where they, for months, sometimes even years, felt a firmness or a tenderness in the lymph nodes of their neck following an illness, even after the illness resolved. It's possible that some of this immune system activity in this exact same real estate where the thyroid lives may have actually caused some of that wonky immune or autoimmune activity against the thyroid, just because that virus maybe persisted in that tissue for a long period of time. And of course, as I've mentioned, the reactivation sometimes can also be the thing that actually kicks off an autoimmune response in the body. So some people have mono or EBV and they recover just fine, but it isn't until years later, perhaps if they, again, are under a very stressful or a difficult lifestyle or life circumstance, where they actually notice maybe some of these old symptoms of the EBV virus reactivating in their body, that it's shortly maybe after that they notice that they have begun the journey towards discovering that they have an autoimmune thyroid condition. So what do we do in this situation? Well, I've just described a really large number of clients that I work with who have dealt with the never well since scenario from a potential childhood or early adult illness, and oftentimes it's mono or EBV. Well, what we want to do is look back to thinking about the ways in which we can strengthen the immune system and prevent it from being so wonky. There are ways in which we can really kind of combat naturally, viral illnesses. And one of them is by knowing if you have any particular nutritional deficiencies that maybe have arisen because of that viral impact on your body. There can be a number of different deficiencies, especially in antioxidants like vitamins C and E, and also vitamin A, zinc, magnesium, and a host of other nutrients that can become deficient because of having an infection. Even today, we're learning more about this, the ways in which the viral impact of something like coronavirus or COVID-19 is playing out in some of these kind of long haulers, right? These long COVID symptoms that actually do also have some underlying nutritional deficiencies as a part of it. So I would recommend working with a board-certified holistic nutrition therapist like me to do testing to find out if you have these underlying nutritional deficiencies, which may be preventing your immune system from properly working, right? Or from properly supporting your overall health. Also, there are some things that you can do to help support your immune system just to kind of get it back on track and prevent potential other, viral complications from other illnesses, or to prevent a reactivation of EBV, or just to prevent that wonkiness that arises from autoimmune activity against the thyroid. And the first and most important thing is getting plenty of rest. Now that's pretty basic stuff. And I'm sure your mom or someone who loves you maybe told you that years ago. You just need to get some more rest, and you were like, I'm fine, and you kept burning the candles at both ends. Well, the thing is that if you don't eventually slow down, your body will force you to do so. So getting plenty of rest, whether it's napping, getting to bed extra early, slowing down, saying no to some things, maybe even curtailing your exercise, these are all part of recovering the body and starting to allow the immune system to come back online in a normal way. So there are foods that also are kind of part of what we call natural killers or natural medicine that can be very supportive of the immune system. Certainly any of the foods that contain the nutrients what I just mentioned, vitamin A, definitely foods that are rich in these. Beta carotenes and precursors to vitamin A would be winter squashes, sweet potatoes, dark leafy greens, basically all of your vegetables, carrots as well. These are all really, really helpful to boosting your body's natural immune support from vitamin A. And then also getting some foods that contain zinc. And zinc is properly found in basically oysters. So, I've talked about this before in some of my other videos, going someplace, if you live on the coast, lucky you, but if you can go someplace where you can get a good dose of oysters, then you can really help to boost your zinc stores. But also pumpkin seeds and other nuts and seeds and legumes as well are a good source of zinc. So bone broth is one that I talk about a lot of times. I'm sure you're probably getting tired of hearing me talk about bone broth, but because of its amino acids and because especially if you're using a bone broth from organic chicken, it contains carnosine, which is very anti-inflammatory and very supportive to the immune system. So I recommend making your own bone broth. You can do it simply in your crock pot. There's lots of ways of just doing this even if you don't cook, or getting something like the Kettle and Fire brand bone broth at your health food store, or you can order directly from their website. But having plenty of bone broth in your diet, both to sip on, to incorporate into soups, but also to braise vegetables and cook grains like gluten-free grains such as long grain brown basmati rice, that can be a really beneficial way of getting more and more of those beneficial nutrients from bone broth into your diet. So other ways to support your immune system with food, I talk about this a lot, especially as it pertains to kind of what the everyday detox details would include. And I talk a lot about the A, B's, and C's, so apples, beets, and carrots. I already mentioned carrots, but those are all really supportive of the immune system, but also onions and broccoli and tomatoes. Any of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are high in quercetin. Quercetin is essentially the nutrient that helps, it's part of the flavonoid family, and it helps to reduce our susceptibility to viral infection. And luckily, right now, there's a lot of great information out there about quercetin as a preventative for COVID-19. So read some of these links below that I'm going to post for you on research and check those out. So to summarize, checking to see if you have specific deficiencies and then working with someone on both a dietary supplement plan as well as a meal plan to help bring those nutritional deficiencies back up to par. Also continuing to eat really healthful, immune supportive foods like the ones I've outlined here. You heard me say a lot of vegetables, and also bone broth. And also getting plenty of rest, taking good care of yourself, slowing down. It's okay, you're not going to miss anything, especially right now. If there was ever a time, it's during a pandemic to really focus on taking good care of your immune system. And you know what? Some of the clients that I'm working with, although we're working together virtually at this time, they actually say they feel better now than they have in a really long time. And that's because they are really focusing on helping to take care of their health and also prevent getting any of these new and novel viruses that are floating around out there. So thank you so much for watching today. Thanks for learning with me all about the relationship between viral infection and the onset of autoimmune conditions, especially EBV mono, and what that may have played a role in your own life. So now you have some of those tips and tools to help you kind of reset that immune system. Check out all of my other videos, and if you're like, wow, this just scratches the surface for me, I'm interested in learning more, please check out Nourished and Renewed with Hashimoto's. Before I go, I just want to tell you that right now I have 2 winter meal plans, a 1-week plan and a 2-week plan, that are available on my website. They're really affordable, and they're great ways to start incorporating all of these foods that I've just shared with you for not only immune system support, but winter wellness and supporting your thyroid. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll be back soon with more videos. Take it easy, and I'll see you soon. Bye.